I'm
Mhm.
just got Razorblade Tears in the mail earlier this week, and I can already tell the growth, which is what I told you. The thing that you like to see with an author is you like to see the scope continue to expand, and sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. And with this book, you can immediately tell that the scope is expanding, which is all we can ever hope for as writers and readers.
Yeah, man. That's the thing. You want to try to improve. You want to try to get better every time you come out. With
Yeah,
Blacktop for me was a big. I think I tried to step up from my first book, Darkest Prayer, and then with Razorblade, it was, it's like, okay, I did Blacktop. I talked about a whole bunch of things that are important to me, and personally, and Blacktop was real cathartic for me on an individual level. But then it was like, okay, now that I've got this sort of platform, what can I do with it? Can I talk about other issues
yeah,
outside of my own scope that are important to me? My mama used to say, the shine wears off new pennies.
yeah,
And if while I got a little bit of that shine, maybe I could talk about something that
yeah,
is important to me. And so talking about, people, men who are, for lack of a better word, mired in their own ignorance.
yeah,
But that doesn't mean they're bad people. I firmly believe everybody has the possibility for redemption, but
yeah,
redemption isn't a gift.
yeah,
You got to earn it.
yeah,
And so you take two characters like Ike and Buddy Lee, two rough old boys that are very similar to people I grew up with,
yeah,
and you present them flaws and all, but you also
yeah.
present them an opportunity to change, and that's what I was trying to do with the book.
Now that I'm thinking about it, hell, me and you, we might even kind of look like Ike and Buddy Lee, mightn't we?
I was thinking it, and I wasn't gonna say it. I was like, I was like, man, it looks like we're living out this book. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know
I
who
think
we're
you're in a
gonna
little
get
better
to.
shape than Buddy.
Yeah, I don't know who we're about to have to track down, but I know they're in trouble when we get there.
I think I think you're in a little better shape than Buddy Lee. But yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking it as soon as you came on screen. I was like, man, look like we're gonna do a live action play the book. But
Yeah. Well, why don't you tell
we
us
have
a
to
little
throw
bit?
reference.
Tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
those characters, and if you want to read
yeah,
that opening, you can, because it's real
yeah. I'll
quick and kind of give people a taste
yeah.
of just the language and that character.
Yeah, so I'll talk about it a little bit. So basically, Razorblade Tears is a story of two men, Ike Randolph and Buddy Lee Jenkins. Ike is black, Buddy Lee is white. Both these men are ex-cons, but they're sort of on opposite ends of the spectrum. Ike came out and he's been on the straight and narrow for the last 15 years. He started his own landscaping business. He was able to put his son through college and buy a house for his wife. Well, Buddy Lee has sort of been scraping by just barely. As we meet him in the book, he just got fired from the driving for a seafood company. And so, what unites these two men who are very different, other than their geographic location, they're both sons of the South, is that their sons were married, and as the book opens, their sons have been killed, and neither Ike nor Buddy Lee had a really good relationship with their sons. Their sons were gay, and neither father really accepted it. And so there's vast chunks of time where they weren't in communication with their sons, or when they were in communication, it was a volatile situation. And so when the book opens, these two men of violence decide to put that violence to good use and try to find out who killed their boys. And it's about revenge. I was inspired by like old 70s grindhouse movies like Rolling Thunder, with William Devane, one of my favorite movies. But also it's a story of like I said, redemption and growth and grief and change. And
Yeah.
even these bad men, have the potential to be better version of themselves. And like you said, I'll read the first chapter. It's real short, and then we can go into like what inspired the book and all that.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
chapter one. Ike tried to remember a time when men with badges come into his door early in the morning, brought anything other than heartache and misery. But try as he might, nothing came to mind. The two men stood side by side on the small concrete landing of his front step with their hands on their belts near the badges and their guns. The morning sun made the badges glimmer like gold nuggets. The two cops were a study in contrast. One was a tall but wiry Asian man. He was all sharp angles and hard edges. The other, a florid-faced white man, was built like a power lifter with a massive head sitting atop a wide neck. They both wore white dress shirts with clip-on ties. The power lifter had sweat stains spreading down from his armpits that vaguely resembled maps of England and Ireland, respectively. Ike's queasy stomach began to do somersaults. He was 15 years removed from Coldwater State Penitentiary. He had bucked the recidivism statistics ever since he'd walked out of that festering wound. Not so much as a speeding ticket in all those years. Yet here he was, with his tongue dry and the back of his throat burning as the two cops stared down at him. It was bad enough being a black man in the good old US of A and talking to the cops. You always felt like you were on the edge of some imaginary precipice during any interaction with an officer of the law. If you were an ex-con, it felt like that precipice was covered in bacon grease. Yes, Ike said. Sir, I'm Detective LaPlata. This is my partner, Detective Robbins. May we come in? What for? Ike asked. LaPlata sighed. It came out low and long like the bottom note in a blues song. Ike tensed. LaPlata glanced at Robbins. Robbins shrugged. LaPlata's head dipped down, then he raised it again. Ike had learned to pick up on body language when he was inside. There was no aggression in their stance, at least not any more than most cops exuded on a normal 12-hour shift. The way LaPlata's head had dropped was almost sad. Sir, do you have a son named Isaiah Randolph? He said finally. That was when he knew. He knew it like he knew when a fight was about to break out in the yard, like he knew when a crackhead was going to try to stab him for a bag back in the day. Like he knew, just knew in his gut, that his homeboy Luther had seen his last sunrise that night he'd gone home with that girl from the satellite bar. It was like a sixth sense, a preternatural ability to sense tragedy seconds before it became a reality. What's happened to my son, Detective LaPlata? Ike asked, already knowing the answer, knowing it in his bones, knowing his life would never be the same. And that's chapter 1.
Yeah. One of the reasons I wanted you to read that section, I want to talk about character as well, but it's your ability to talk about things that are socially relevant and socially important. I remember one time it was at a festival in France. I was on a panel with Megan Abbott, and she said that she believed that the crime novel was or had the greatest ability to be a social novel, and I think she was right. And I think you do that well. There are a lot of writers who do that well, but you do that particularly well. And so from the very beginning, we get this type of conversation and dialogue about things. Talk a little bit about that, about writing about this guy trying to have interactions from something that simple to something as complex as trying to write about two very masculine, like overly masculine individuals trying to look back on the lives of their gay sons.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about what Megan said, and I've often thought that the crime novel has the most potential to talk about the things that polarize us. I fully believe that crime and criminal activity is the language of the dispossessed, man. It's the language of the people at the bottom of the barrel and it's a language that they use because a lot of times nobody listens to anything else. And so when I write those characters, when I try to tell those stories, part of it is, I grew up in a really impoverished environment. My mom and dad separated when I was a kid, and my mom got sick, so she couldn't work. And so I am very intimately acquainted with struggle. But that being said, I also was raised in a household that was really everybody around me read. Everybody around me read something. My grandma read romance novels. My mama read folklore books and biographies. My uncle and my aunt read horror novels and detective stories. And so in that environment, I saw the power of books. I saw the power that authors have, and specifically authors of writing about crime. Because like I said, you're talking about people who are at the end of their rope. And I think that's the secret. Because when you read a crime novel, whether you live on, you know, Park Avenue, or whether you live in Bel Air, or whether you live, you know, in Matthews, Virginia, you know, down by Chesapeake Bay, you understand desperation. You understand being backed in a corner. And crime novels do that exceedingly well. And of course, a lot of times the crime novels, characters put themselves in the corner, but a lot of times it's society, it's the world that conspires against them, you know. And so when I started the book, I initially started it with the second chapter, but then I went back and looked at it, and I really wanted to give readers an insight into Ike's mind and the mind of somebody who, you know, is doing everything that society tells you you're supposed to do. You know, he came out of jail, you know, he got a job, he built himself a career, you know, and he's working with his hands, and it's hard work, but it's honest work. And yet, even that, it's still, he's still afraid of the police. He's still afraid, even
he's still
though
a
he hasn't done
felon.
anything wrong.
Yeah.
He's still a felon.
You know,
And so,
you
so
write
you
that
can't help.
section about you write that section about how those first couple years he was running the straight and narrow, trying to leave all of that behind him, and it didn't matter. You know, they were still stopping him every day. They were still giving him side eye at the grocery store. He was never going to escape that, partly because of his past, and partly because he was a black man.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, like he talks about him and Buddy Lee talk in the book. You know, he says, you know, Buddy Lee there's a scene in the book where Buddy Lee says, "You look like you're doing pretty good to me. You know, you're making this money. You got this nice dually truck." And Ike says, "Yeah, but I get pulled over 3 or 4 times a month. You know, I can't get a loan to expand my business." Yeah. And you know, you talk about, you know, and you talk about green, because Ike said, Buddy Lee said something about, you know, the only color that matters is green. He said, "Yeah, but you know, green hits different when it's in a black hand." And so I wanted to talk about that, because that is the reality for a lot of people. Conversely, on the other side of that, talking about Buddy Lee, you know, here's a person that has, again, made those same mistakes that Ike has made, but for whatever reason, he isn't been able to pull himself up out of that. He's kind of given in, where Ike is trying not to give up, and Buddy Lee is trying to sort of kind of giving in. And for me, I'm always fascinated by how similar and also the differences, the experiences of people of different races are in the South when it comes to poverty. You know, I have said this before, this ain't nothing new, but I have more in common sometimes with a white man like yourself than I may have in common with somebody from New York or Philly or Chicago, just because we grew up in similar environments. We grew up in a similar world. You know, if I say to you cornbread and scrapple, I don't have to explain what it is. You know, so but that being said, at the same time, I think we both can acknowledge that there is an inherent possibility of privilege that you have that I don't have. Absolutely. That's not saying that your life is perfect, you know, but that's just the nature of the beast. And so for me, it was really important to talk about these two characters in a way that acknowledged that, but also acknowledged the ways that they're very similar. But that being said, again, with Ike, for all his hard work, for everything he's done, like you said, he's still a felon. He still got that record. For a lot of people, he'll never be Ike Randolph. He'll always be Riot. And Riot was his nickname when he was kind of in the streets. And I think, you know, that's something that I wanted to talk about. But that being said, he also, I think, is a flawed character, because it's hard for him to, you know, as much as he wants people to look past his mistakes, he can't look past his son's sexuality, which is not a mistake.
Correct.
Yeah. But you know, he wants people to give him a chance and meet him on his own terms. But then he couldn't meet his own son on his own terms, and that's fascinating for me.
Oh yeah, that's kind of where I was trying to get with that question. Is you've got all of these layers that you're stacking up to add that complexity. You know, talk just a little bit about playing around with that idea of toxic masculinity. I think both of these characters are really, you know, especially early on, and to be quite honest, maybe more so Buddy Lee than Ike. You know, there's a part of me that thinks that if Buddy Lee had had more time with his son, I don't know that things would have changed, but there's a part of me that feels that if Ike had had more time with his, that things would have. Early on, he even mentions just if he had had the ability to have a conversation, if he's imagining a conversation and what that might have played out like. Talk a little bit about just that toxic masculinity as well as all of the things that allowed you to do.
Yeah. So again, these men grew up in a similar situation to myself. I grew up in a small town, and in the small towns, especially whether it's, I think in rural small towns, there's the holy trinity of like rural fiction or Southern fiction is race, class, and sex. And these are men that when they were young boys, even though they were getting in trouble, they probably went to church every Sunday, but they was out at the shot house every Saturday night. And their ideas of masculinity were shaped by these very narrow-minded definitions, that you have to, toughness or whatever it means to be tough is handling yourself in a fight and being able to, how many women can you bed and all of that, which is, it's definitely toxic masculinity. And as they've gotten older, they've changed a little bit, but not enough, And so with Ike and Buddy Lee, both of them, I think they saw the world in a very particular way, a very narrow-minded way, that they couldn't expand that vision even for their boys, even for their sons. And that says more about them than it does their sons. That insecurity, that inability for men of a certain age and a certain dynamic to communicate their fears, their frailties. I grew up in a place where, you better not cry. I don't care what's happening. You better not shed a tear. And I grew up in a place where, that the way you expressed yourself was through hard work or fighting. A good man when I grew up wasn't necessarily a man that talked about his feelings. It was a man that got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and got on a John boat and went out there and pulled crab pots until 5 o'clock at night. Or he was a man that you better not trifle with. If you saw him in the parking lot of a beer garden, you better not say 2 cross words to him. And so that was what I grew up seeing. But as I got older and I experienced more and I tried to educate myself, and people that also I met in my life educated me, I realized that you can expand that definition of what masculinity is. And so for men like Buddy Lee and Ike, I don't think they ever had that moment where it's like, I need to expand this definition. And so that tragic and toxic masculinity is so hurtful to them and to the people around them. For like Ike, if, like you said, if he could have just, he crossed that glacier of ice between him and his son and just talked to him and realized it doesn't matter who you lay down with at night, as long as that person loves you and they care about you. And, for Buddy Lee, I think it was a little more difficult. I think Buddy Lee also is dealing with his own feelings of insecurity and his own feelings of inferiority. There's a couple times in the book where I have him refer to himself as, and I don't mean any disrespect by this, but he refers to himself as white trash, as a redneck, whatever. And those things aren't necessarily negative, but in his mind they are. He has a certain idea about himself, and he's never been able to like grow past that. And so, like you said, I don't know if him and Derek could have patched things up. I think also Ike has the advantage of having a wife who don't put up with none of his BS.
Yeah.
She holds him accountable. Just to give the readers an idea, there's a scene at the funeral where Ike calls out the minister that's preaching the funeral because the minister is basically saying that his son and his son's husband have gone to hell. And so he, takes issue with that. But at the same time, his wife is like, oh, you getting mad at the minister? Well, where were you when people were picking on it? You said words to him. And so again, those layers, that kind of dichotomous situation where Ike is defending his son in one hand, but has to be held accountable on the other. And I don't think Buddy Lee had anybody in his life doing that. So I think it would have been more difficult for him.
Yeah. I think also what you're getting at is something that you've historically done well. I think back on Blacktop Wasteland, and it's the same thing in that you have these very masculine men, and then you have women who are, in all honesty, tougher than they are. I don't remember ever reading a female character of yours who who would hit any of those old cliches. You know, to be honest, they're the type of women I grew up with, and the type of women I'm around. I think, you know, we went to a concert last weekend, me and Ashley with some friends of mine, and on the way back, my buddy's wife said something to me, and Ashley said, "That's the only person in this world that'll make you blush," and she's right. Like, she said something, you know, just, and I was just like, "Holy shit!" You know, is that what she just said? Uh, and I think that's the reality of a lot of Southern people in general, but you do that really
Yeah.
well. So talk a little bit about writing those types of female characters that keep these other characters in check.
Well, I was very lucky to be raised by those kind of women. I have those kind of women in my life today, you know. Women who just don't take no crap, man. They don't take no shit. They call you out on your BS, you know, on your bullshit. And also, but they do it in a way that is honest and not belittling. You know what I'm saying? Somebody who really loves you, who really cares about you, can tell you when you're messing up. And it doesn't necessarily, you may take it as belittling, but they don't mean it like that, because they wouldn't tell you that if they didn't love you. They wouldn't tell you that if they didn't care about you. And Ike's wife, Maya, you know, she's broken, she's hurt, she's lost her son, you know, but at the same time, she has to hold Ike accountable because he didn't make those mistakes. He made choices.
Yeah.
He made bad choices when it came to raising Isaiah, and she's not going to let him like get away with it. At the same time, there's a scene toward the beginning of the book where you know, he basically asked her for permission to go after these guys, you know, and she gives it in a way that is very much emblematic of like you said, women that I grew up around. You know, sometimes, you know, like my mama used to tell me, don't start a fight, but if somebody start one, you better finish it. And that was my mama told me that. That wasn't my daddy.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think I was very lucky to have those kind of women to draw from. But yeah, the women that I have in my life now, growing up in the South and rural America, you know, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that, you know, the women that are around, that we were around growing up, and the women who were around now, they hold things together. You know,
Yeah.
they do it all day, every day, in a way that a lot of times the men in our lives may not. And
Yeah.
so I'm very lucky, very blessed to have those kind of people to draw from and to create characters that have those qualities. But I really strive hard in my books to not have cliche female characters. I don't want
Yeah.
any keep I don't want to keep female characters that are just there to prop up the male characters. You know, I
Yeah.
want them to have a depth and a complexity to them that helps drive the narrative without sacrificing their importance to the story. So I work really hard at that. I try really hard to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. You just mentioned in that, you know, kind of Ike going to his wife, and you know, early on in this book, it's you know, pretty clear that Buddy Lee and Ike are gonna, you know, they're gonna track these people down who have killed their sons, and so what you wind up having is kind of a plot wise a very traditional mystery in a lot of ways. Uh, but at the same time, it's not a traditional mystery in the sense of we don't have your traditional protagonists. You know, the people who are tracking them down are you know, these two people with you know, criminal histories, and kind of who more fit in with that fringe element. Talk a little bit about just those influences, and kind of what you were trying to do with
Yeah.
the plot.
Yeah. So, you know, it is, like you said, in one sense, it's a mystery because we got to find out who killed these boys. But in the other sense, it's not, because Ike and Buddy Lee are not really putting clues together. They're not
Yeah.
using deductive reasoning.
Yeah.
They're basically, you know, the mystery is a wall and they're hammers. You know, they're just knocking it down.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's not Philip Marlowe, and it's not Sherlock Holmes. It's not even Mike Hammer. You know, if you think of a real tough guy, it's just two men who are bound and determined to find the people that hurt their sons no matter what. And I thought when I was putting it together, that I thought that was something that would be really palatable to a lot of people, that
Yeah.
some people could understand that, because really what drives them, what makes them, allows them to solve the mystery, so to speak, like I said, isn't any kind of great leaps in logic. It's just their implacable, immeasurable rage, their grief.
Yeah.
They're somebody described them as two horsemen of the apocalypse, and they
Yeah.
are. They're sharks, and I think they're driven so deeply because of their grief, because they know they messed up with their sons. And so, again, like I said, this is the only way they know how to express themselves.
Yeah.
But at times, I do have them talk to each other. I force them, basically, this. If you live in the country, it takes 30 minutes to get anywhere. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of time where they're in a truck driving to these locations as they're investigating things. They have to talk, and it starts out very, very tense. But I think hopefully by the end, they become a little more than friends, a little less than family, because
Yeah.
they're united by something very few people can understand.
Yeah.
And their specific situation unites them in a way that I don't think anybody else could imagine.
Yeah. Man, I think speaking of conversations, I mean, I think every writer does something well, and when I think of the people who wrote incredible dialogue that I was often jealous of, I think of people like Elmore Leonard, Robert Parker's dialogue, but that is something that you do incredibly well, is the dialogue. I think honestly, for me, that's your greatest strength on the page, is the dialogue. It never feels constructed. It always feels absolutely perfectly natural. I never question whether or not the character would have said it. I know they would have said it. How did you develop that ear?
Man, it's funny. I think I really got it. I used to sit at the knee of a lot of backyard pontificators and cookout orators. I was very blessed to have a lot of uncles and aunts who love to talk trash when you're playing horseshoes, or when you're cooking at the grill, or just sitting around and they're passing around a little mason jar of what. And so I was immersed in that as a kid. And so I kind of picked up the rhythm of language even before I started writing. Like, I just love the way voices sound. I love real conversations where people cut each other off. There's awkward pauses. There's people talking at the same time. And as I got older and I started writing, I just sort of like fell in love with that music of a conversation. When we go out, I have a buddy of mine, my best friend actually. Before the pandemic, we used to go out once a week and play pool at a bar. And part of that was hanging out with him, but part of it was me listening to conversations, not eavesdropping. I don't really care about the content. I just want to listen to how people talk and how different people talk at different points in the evening. So to use that as an example, if you're in a bar and you and your buddy having a couple beers, and there's a guy and a girl and they're standing by the bar, you can pick up in the tone of their dialogue. Do they know each other? Have they met? How's things going? And you can also pick up, and this has happened to me more than once, so I know it. You can pick up when that woman is no longer interested, when that door is closed. And you can pick up in the way that the guy she's talking to don't get it. And you can tell, it's like, bro, it's over. You might move on. That ain't gonna happen. And so that train has left the station. But for me, I love it. I love listening to people, and then also the people you mentioned. I took inspiration from them. Elmore Leonard and Robert Parker and Dennis Lehane is one of my favorite people that writes dialogue. And I tried to do what they did, just put my own spin on it. I mean, like for Buddy Lee and they have two distinct ways of talking, but at first they have a hard time having a conversation. But as the book moves on, they don't change the way they talk. They just learn each other's rhythm. And so they're able to talk in a way that they can get across what they're trying to say. And then, like I said, I just love the language, man. I love the music, the language. And I appreciate you saying that very much, because that's one of the things I work really hard on. I'm terrible at I'm awful at descriptions. I tell people, don't ever build a house based on the way I describe it in a book, because that joke will be 75 feet wide and 8 feet long. But for dialogue, man, I definitely do try to give my characters, and I also do this. This is just a thing I do. I don't know about anybody else. I always try to give each character their own specific syntax, their own specific way of talking.
Yeah.
So Maya talks different than Ike. Ike talks different than Buddy Lee.
Yep.
Buddy talks different than Tangerine. And so it helps, I think it helps give readers a sense of who's talking when. And that way also cuts down on dialogue tags. You ain't got to use he said and she said and Buddy Lee said all the time. Because if you're doing it well enough, readers will be able to tell, oh, well, that's Buddy Lee talking. Only he would say that to somebody, and that's Ike talking. I know that tone. So it's something I do work really hard at. So thank you. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah. I think the other thing that you're able to get across with that sound, with the way that these people talk, as people always think that I talk like I'm from right where I am, and I didn't. I'm not from here. I grew up east of here, but I was sitting at a bar in town one night, and this fella started talking, and we were talking to each other, and I asked him what his last name was, and when I asked him what his last name was, his first thought was he's trying to place me somewhere here, and he said my name's Bigham, but I ain't from here. And I said, well, where? I said, where are you from? And he said, I'm from Steel Creek. And I said, I'm from Paul Creek. And those were two communities that were side by side. But the reason I was asking him that was because to my ear, he sounded like me, and he sounded like my people. To other people who can't pick up on all of that, they hear me and they place me here. But ultimately, what I'm getting at is that voice becomes central to place. And it would be central to place if we were talking about Brooklyn. Now, I don't have I don't know anything about Brooklyn. You probably don't know anything about Brooklyn, but voice is central. Voice is central to place. Talk a little bit about the importance of place, and kind of why you're not stuck in a sense as limited, stuck in a sense as rooted in the place you're writing about, in the same way that I am about Jackson County, North Carolina.
That's, it's funny. That's one of the things I liked when I first started reading your books, Where All the Light Tends to Go. That was the first one that I read. And I had read it it'd been out for a couple of years and I hadn't read it. And that's one of the things that I really like. As soon as I picked up that book, it's like, I may not know exactly where these people are, but I know that these people know where they are. These characters know where they exist at. And that was something I tried to do with my stuff. I'm from, I tell people all the time, I'm from Virginia, from southeastern Virginia, down by the lowlands, by the Chesapeake Bay. It's my heart and it's my home. And there is a specific way of talking. There's a specific syntax. There's a specific jargon that exists, near these marshes on the coast of Chesapeake Bay that doesn't exist anywhere else. Like you said, there's a specific way of talking from Brooklyn, or if you're in San Diego, or if you're in a neighborhood and if you're in I was talking to Jordan Harper about this. If you're from Missouri, there's a certain way. And for me, it's very important for me that I establish that identity very quickly in my stuff. I want you to know that you're in Red Hill County, Virginia, that you're, 45 miles from the capital city, but you're like another 35 miles from Norfolk. You're in between two cities, but in between these two cities is this beautiful and harsh and also wonderful rural area, that, like I said, exists in my heart. That I love it, and so I've been very fortunate to travel different places. I've been to New York City, Chicago, I've been a lot of places across the country and stuff. And I've been incredibly moved to see different parts of the country and how different, how unique each part is. But like you are about where you from, for me, Virginia is just, that's my place, man. That's it's the dirt under my fingernails. It's the ground under my feet. It's the place where I lay my head, and it just means so much to me. And so I do everything I can to make people realize, oh, did you in Virginia now? Like this is where you at. This is where, waterman and crab pots are nearby. Magnolia trees are running down the road. And so the way I do it, narratively, is I do use a lot of sensory stuff. I get dinged on this by some people, but it's just the way I do it. I use a lot of smell and sound. And if I'm telling a book that takes place in the summer, I'm going to talk about how hot it is all the time. I'll talk about the humidity. If I'm talking about it in the fall, exactly. It's gonna be a lot of sweaty so-and-sos in this book if it's Virginia in the middle of July. But if it's the fall, I'm going to talk about the colors and changing in the leaves. I'm going to talk about how it never gets really, really cold around here until about December. I use a lot of that, but also I want to talk about like the architecture and the structure of the town. The fields. I mean, like when I talk about my characters driving past fields, we talk about cornfields, and we don't grow soybeans up here, so we thought it was a lot of corn, and it's a lot of collards, and it's a lot of edible crops up this way. So I talk about that. I talk about the cows. I talk about the layout of the town. How, like I said, how far it is from the house to the grocery store. All of that, it's a lot. I'm using a lot of words to say atmosphere. I'm trying to create this atmosphere so that if you were to come here the way I live at, you'd be able to look and say, oh man, this is just like the book. I see what he's saying. And so it's important to me as a storyteller, as an author, to do that, because I want my readers to be immersed in the book. But also, like I said, on a personal level, I just want to tell the stories of the place I'm from. And I love the place I'm from,
Yeah.
and I didn't always feel that way. That was, growing up, it's true what they say. I had to go away and come back to appreciate what I have here and what it means to me. And so, I'm very lucky that I'm able to do a job that I can sit on my back porch and watch these two little squirrels that eat all my bird seed up.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Man, me and you have talked about this before. And there's a part of me that hates asking these questions because I've told you before, the only writers who get asked questions about race are writers who ain't white. A white person never gets asked a question about race.
I know, right? But no, it's okay, man.
But the reason I'm wanting to ask this specific question is that I think it's a very important conversation to continue to have. And it's that same thing as I spoke about you with Blacktop Wasteland, which is that for a long time, no one wanted to recognize Black existence in rural America. And the truth is that it was evident in the literature. They just didn't want to recognize it as such. So I think about a writer like Jesmyn Ward. Jesmyn Ward was writing about rural Black Americans in the South. Crystal Wilkinson was, the list is limitless. And nobody ever wanted to have that conversation, or at least the rurality of those stories fell underneath the racial identity of those stories. It was a Black book. It wasn't a rural book. And I think that's something that we're witnessing shifting. One of my favorite books this year was a book by Natalie Basel, who was a fiction writer who wrote Queen Sugar. But this book was a collection of nonfiction called We Are Each Other's Harvests. And it's this beautiful book about Black farmers and about Black agriculture in the American South. I think it's an important book. Talk a little bit about that being your identity. So it's your true identity, but also just kind of talk more largely and broadly about this idea and the importance that idea has on redefining what it means to be Black in America.
Yeah, I think I've said this before, and I'll say it again. There are people that think the South or rural America or Appalachia is just the provenance of Confederate apologists and quote unquote good old boys. And, it's just like the same way when you hear people talk about the blue collar voter, they mean white people. But everybody I grew up with as a Black man was blue collar. They all worked hard, physically demanding jobs. And so for me, that's always been my identity. But like you said, I didn't see it represented in the books that I read a lot. I grew up reading like Ernest J. Gaines. Ernest J. Gaines is one of the greatest writers, men of letters that the South has ever produced. Yeah. To me, he's up there with Faulkner. And I didn't see him, like you said, I didn't see him getting recognized as a great writer of rural literature. It was always, he's writing about Black people that happen to live in rural America. And that was a way, I think, for some people to kind of push us aside from that they created that identity that rural America is this and Black America is everything else. And, I mean, like you were talking about Black farmers, I lived not too far from some fellows who are the presidents of the National Black Farmers Association down in Surrey. I grew up with black watermen and people that are from this, again, that rural area. I have cousins who are musicians and blues musicians and all of that. And I think it's the previous identity or idea was sort of, it's just like music. It's just like, the blues is grounded in African American music, and then you take that and you mix it with hill music or mountain music, and you get bluegrass and so on and so forth. And I think the same thing is true of literature. I think as a black writer from the rural experience, I'll be honest with you, I ran into a lot of obstacles trying to tell these stories because, to be perfectly frank, there was a lot of white people didn't want to hear it. There was a lot of black people didn't want to hear it. There's some, and there are some people who don't want to acknowledge that existence. I think for some people, they don't want to acknowledge it because they feel like it only belongs to one set of people. And I think for some other people, they don't want to acknowledge it because there's a lot of hurt. There's a lot of pain that exists for African Americans in a rural environment. That being said, this world, this rural land, this southern land, it belongs to all of us. It belongs to Black Americans, indigenous Southerners, Black Southerners, white Southerners, Asian Southerners, Southerners that identify as gay or just identify as LGBTQ. And so for me, it's been incredibly, incredibly gratifying to see the reemergence of the rural Black writer, and to see people really open up and be willing to listen to this. Because I'm not doing nothing new. Like you said, you talk about Jessamine Ward and Crystal and all those. This didn't start with me. It didn't start with Sean Cosby. But I think we're at a moment in time where people are more open to listening to that experience and understanding that experience. And I said this before, but I think also the thing about rural fiction, Southern fiction, is that we do have more in common with each other than we would dare, maybe some people would dare admit. And I think, for me, it's a way that we can kind of spread this story of rural America to everyone. I get so sick of seeing like the news talk about the South like it's just this monolith of crazed, far right extremists, and it's not. It's not, so not. Like I have so many friends that I grew up with, that I've met, that I've experienced life with in the South, and I've been able to experience the beautiful and exquisite nature of living in a rural area with people of all backgrounds, and so it's important to me that, like you said, that people aren't learn to experience that through African American eyes, through, like I said, indigenous eyes. I think ultimately stories like Razorblade Tears, Blacktop Wasteland, or stories like David Haskell Winably Whedon's book Winter Counts, or books that talk about this experience outside of just the straight white male gaze are really important because it's nothing new. It's always been there. It's just like you said, now I think people are more open to receiving it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sitting right now at a university, and people have all these ideas about Appalachia, and one of the things they would not want to think is that I'm within walking distance of one of the oldest churches in this county, and it's a Black AME church. They don't want to, when they think about Appalachia, they don't believe that those people were even here. Appalachia looks like me, I guess. I don't, and they refuse to look at it with any sort of complexity. And I think you're absolutely right. I think we're at a really great time in some ways. I find myself a lot of times when I think about when I look at your success and I look at this story and I look at the people who are picking it up, and I find myself really hopeful in a lot of ways. Maybe, and I'm a pessimist, So me being hopeful, I think it might be a scary thing, but I find myself hopeful that maybe we're starting to be able to look at the world with a little bit more gray rather than putting everything here or here, trying to compartmentalize the world into super easy things that we can figure out.
I think people would get a better understanding of Appalachia and rural America if they read your books and my books instead of books by folks like J.D. Vance.
Yeah,
that's all I'm gonna say about that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I think the experience of rural America is way more multifaceted than anybody, than a lot of people, I should say, understand or want to accept. But I do think we're on a different trajectory. I hope.
Yeah.
I like I said, I'm crossing my fingers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's open it up for some questions. I know we're probably right about 7 o'clock, and I'm sure there's some good questions out there. So let's do that.
Yes, thank you. I just want to start by saying how much I've loved this conversation. Thank you both. I've been just sort of amening in the background a little bit. Y'all can hear it, but so, and that is my criteria for a good event, right? Like if I can just be back here, like, yeah, you said it. So appreciate you both very much. I really love this conversation. So we do have a couple of questions. And the first one actually is going to harken back to something that you started with about crime novels as social novels. And I would love to hear both of you answer the question. The question is, what, if any, do you see as your responsibility to society as a novelist? Yeah,
I'll
we'll
go
start
first
with
with
Sean.
that.
Yeah.
I think my ultimately my first responsibility is to tell a good story. That's my first charge as an author, is to tell a good story. I think it was Stephen King that said, "Don't matter what you're talking about if nobody reads the story." So you got to tell a good story, I think. But right behind that is to tell the truth. And sometimes the truth is hard. Sometimes the truth is harsh. Sometimes, my grandma used to say, a hit dog will holler. And sometimes we're that hit dog. And it's hard for people to accept it. But that's the responsibility. That's the mantle that we've taken on as writers. I've already gotten some really nasty emails about Razorblade Tears, and the book ain't been out a week, and I just let those roll off my back. I take solace in the fact that if you wrote me this email, that means you read the book, and even though if you don't like it because I'm talking about LGBTQ issues, I'm talking about race, I'm talking about class, even if right now you don't like it, maybe in a couple of years, something I said will bury a nugget in your head, and you'll realize that that's a conversation we should be having, or not. But either way, I already got your money, so it don't matter.
Yeah, I think I agree with that idea of getting to the reality of something. So specifically, I think about that last novel of mine, When These Mountains Burn. I wrote that novel because the topic, which was largely about opioids and heroin, became something inignorable, in the sense that there were addicts in my front yard banging on our screen door asking whether or not we had needles so that they could skin pop. It was stepping out at the post office and quite literally there being a dozen needles on the ground. So it became important for me to try and document the reality of something that was taking place, and to try to provide a real perspective to those addicts and to those families. I read something today that last year we had more overdoses than we've ever had in American history. And if I told you to guess the number, I doubt you could get it. But it was 95,000 overdoses that we'd had and experienced. I went to get my oil changed the other day, and as I was passing the gas station, they were pulling a body out of the gas station bathroom, and I know what happened in that bathroom. Anybody who lives there knows what happened in that bathroom. And so when I think about my obligation as a writer, it's not so much that it was a Russian novelist who said this, and I'm going to screw it up because I always do. And hell, they've all got names that none of us can pronounce anyway, so it don't really damn matter. But what he said was that it's not the role of the artist to answer the question. It's the role of the artist to ask the question clearly, to state the question clearly. And I think that's what I see as my role is to try and create this piece of ground that you can walk through. And at the end of it, I don't want to have steered you anywhere. I just want you to have walked across that piece of earth.
I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good answers from both of you. Thank you. Not that there was a right or wrong answer to that question, but but thank you for, but thank you for really speaking to the question, right? And really appreciate that. So then it's not a book event without a process question. And hopefully you're not too, hopefully you're not too tired of answering them, but folks are always real interested. I'm always real interested. And so again, for both of you, if you could just talk a little bit about your process, how long does it take you to write drafts, and what do revisions look like, and really just anything that you would like to share. David, you so kindly talked about something I would have asked about if you hadn't, which is Sean's dialogue. Sean, I actually asked you about this in another event, because it is I just want to go ahead and say to the folks out there, for no other reason than the dialogue in S.A. Cosby's book. Like if you don't read crime novels, if you feel like you're not the least bit interested, like just pick these books up to hear people talk in them. That's just my personal.
Thank you.
There are lots of other reasons, don't get me wrong, but you really don't even need another one. So I'll just say
that's that. That's so incredibly kind.
It's striking because dialogue is hard. Yeah. And David, since you
I'll send you the payment on. I'll send you the payment. I'll send you the payment on Cash App.
Yeah.
No.
But your process,
my process is pretty. I hate to pull back the curtain. I'm not very complicated. I'll be honest. I'm really lazy. I'm a lazy writer. I don't like outlining. I do as minimal amount of research as I do, just enough research not to get in trouble. But for me, the way that I start a book is I write myself a really detailed synopsis. So let's say I came up with an idea, like with Blacktop Wasteland. I came up with an idea about this getaway driver who gets pulled back into crime, into the criminal life. And so I sat down and I typed it, because my handwriting is terrible. Oh my God, my handwriting is like hieroglyphics. I sat down and typed it, and I type out a 2 or 3 page synopsis, and it's very much a stream of consciousness. It's not me going point by point. It's just me telling myself the story. I can't tell you the story until I've told myself the story. And then once I've told myself the story, then I can kind of use that as a roadmap. A lot of times the finished product doesn't look exactly like the synopsis, or it'd be very, like with Razorblade Tears, it's very different from the synopsis. But that synopsis is my roadmap. It's my sort of guiding light, so that I can start the story, and I refer back to it because I know what points I want to hit, where I want to hit them. And usually it takes me about 7 to 9 months to write a book from first draft to final draft. Before I was getting published by Flatiron, it was probably anywhere from 3 to 5 months, because I was working with a smaller firm and I was kind of putting out stuff myself. And so, but yeah, that's pretty much my process. I use a synopsis. I don't outline. I don't, like I said, I do very minimal research. I made up a county, so I wouldn't have to do geography. And that's about it. I think the thing that I tell people who want to be writers that ask me for advice is, I can teach you grammar. I can teach you verb and subject agreement. I can teach you how to diagram a sentence, even though I don't think kids do that anymore. But I can't teach you how to tell a story. The only way, you can get that is, I think you have to be kind of born with it, and you have to read a lot. That's a part of my process too. I try to read voraciously. And so that's about it. That's all I do. That's the trick.
What about you, David? What are your tricks?
I think one of the problems with the types of questions you get about craft is that I think, and this is a very American phenomenon, this doesn't seem to happen elsewhere. There seems to be kind of if I can get the answer to A and B and C, I can add those together, divide it or whatever. You've got this kind of equational route that gets you to a finished product of a novel. And the truth is that every single one of us is doing things entirely different. And the best writers I've ever known have come to recognize and trust their process wholeheartedly. And so for me, the bad thing is that every novel's been different, absolutely different. I think about the first novel I wrote it over the course of a month and a half. I was working 2 jobs at the time. I was writing in the middle of the night from 10 to 4 and going to sleep and getting up at 7. And I did that out of necessity. The next novel, it was different. What has seemed to happen is that it seemed to start taking me more and more time. And I think part of the reason is that it kind of to go back to where our conversation started, is that I think the scope is expanding. I think early on I was really interested in propulsion. I wanted to tell a story that moved very quickly. And it's not that I still don't want to do that, because I do. But it's that comes very naturally and easily for me. It's not hard for me to make a story move on the page. It's just not. What is hard for me is to get to that, is to start layering all of that complexity to where you might not just read it once and get it. You might read it 2 or 3 times, and every time you're finding something new. I think the things that interest me as a writer have continued to evolve. So truthfully, it's that I'm relearning process every time. The novel I'm working on I wish to God it was like the last one or the one that came before, because it's just not. And for the most part, I would say it makes me want to pull my hair out, but I already have. I'm bald. It's gone. I pulled it out. It's drove me crazy. You might talk to me next time, and I'll be working at the Dollar General and just hung this whole damn writer's bit up altogether.
Well, then people will probably be stopping into that Dollar General just to hear you talk about the books you got done before you switched careers.
Yeah. I'll sign books and sell zebra cakes, and that's what I'll do for a living.
Oh my gosh. Again, I've just really, really enjoyed this hour. Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always our pleasure. We will, at this point, I feel like it's safe to say sooner than later, be able to invite y'all back into the store. And we hope, Sean, that you can visit us in Asheville. David, I know you don't love coming to Asheville either, but we hope to we hope to see you in town too.
Yeah, that's good food.
I'd love to come and visit.
Yeah. We would love to see you both. Oh, that's West Ash. I don't know if you heard the motorcycle. Maybe it's just me. I was going to say that's West Asheville right there.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's summertime. So to everyone out in the audience, or if you're watching the video later, I also just want to encourage you to buy these gentlemen's books. And of course, we love it if you purchase them from Malaprops. It helps us do what we do. But if you're somewhere else and we're not your home store, just purchase it from your independent bookseller, please. The megalomaniacal multinational corporations don't need you to buy books from them. They just don't.
Yeah.
So purchase from your local indie, please and thank you. And and we do look forward to seeing all of y'all in whatever fashion again soon at another event or at Malaprops in Asheville. And thank you all so much again for coming. Everybody, please stay safe and well, and I guess try to stay cool if you can. Because it is, as my grandmother used to say, it's summertime down south.
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
Sean, congratulations.
Thank you all so much for having us.
Yeah.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so much, David, my man. It's good to see you. I hope sooner than later, like I said, we get to see each other in person.
Yes, sir. I'd love that.
Y'all be good.
All right.
Yeah, you too.
Me too.
Thank you all. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.